The rain had turned the road into a river of mud, and Karga could barely see through the blood streaming from the gash above her eye when she collapsed at the edge of the wheat field. She had been walking for 3 days without food, driven from her clan's territory by her own mother after she had refused to participate in a raid on a human settlement. The other orcs had called her weak, a traitor to her kind, and her mother had struck her across the face before casting her out into the wilderness. Karga had thought she could make it to the neutral territories beyond the mountains, but her strength had finally given out. The world spun around her as she fell forward onto her hands and knees, the wheat stalks scratching against her green skin. She could hear nothing but the pounding of rain and the rushing of blood in her ears. When strong hands gripped her shoulders, she tried to fight, but her body would not respond. A voice cut through the storm, deep and steady, speaking words she could not quite understand. Then the world went black. Karga woke to warmth. The sensation was so unexpected that she jerked upright, immediately regretting the movement as pain lanced through her skull. A hand pressed gently against her shoulder, easing her back down onto something soft. A bed. She was lying in an actual bed. "Easy there," the voice said. "You took quite a fall. That gash on your head needed stitching." Karga's eyes slowly focused on the face above her. A human man, perhaps in his late 40s, with weathered skin the color of tanned leather and gray threading through his dark brown hair. His eyes were a warm hazel, creased at the corners from years of squinting into the sun. He wore a simple homespun shirt and had the calloused hands of someone who worked the land. "Where am I?" Karga managed to ask, her voice hoarse. "My farmhouse," the man replied. "Found you face down in my wheat field during the storm last night. Could not just leave you out there to drown in the mud." He moved to a small table and poured water from a pitcher into a wooden cup. "Name's Barrett Gentry. I am guessing you have had a rough few days." Karga accepted the cup with trembling hands, studying Barrett carefully. Humans usually ran from orcs or attacked them on sight. Yet this man had brought her into his home, tended her wounds, and was now offering her water as if she were an honored guest. It made no sense. "Why did you help me?" she asked after drinking deeply. Barrett pulled up a wooden chair and sat down, his movements unhurried. "Served 20 years in the border wars," he said. "Saw plenty of fighting between humans and orcs. Saw good people on both sides and bad ones too. When the wars ended, I retired out here to farm and leave all that hatred behind." He gestured to her bandaged head. "Whatever brought you to my field in that condition, I figured you needed help more than judgment." "My clan cast me out," Karga said, surprising herself with her honesty. Perhaps it was the exhaustion or the kindness in his eyes. "I refused to raid a human village. They called me a coward and a traitor." Barrett was quiet for a long moment. "That took courage," he finally said, "more courage than swinging a sword." Karga felt something tighten in her chest. No one had ever called her courageous. Strong, yes, useful in battle, certainly, but courageous for refusing to fight. "Never. You should rest," Barrett continued, standing up. "I will bring you some food when you are ready. Take your time recovering, my lady. You are safe here." The word stopped her. "My lady," Barrett smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered face. "Well, I cannot very well call you the orc or stranger now, can I? You are a guest in my home, and every guest deserves to be treated with respect." "Until you tell me your name, my lady will have to do." "Karga," she said softly. "My name is Karga." "Karga it is, then. But I think I will keep calling you my lady anyway, if that suits you. Been living alone out here for 5 years now. Nice to have some company worth being polite to." He moved toward the door. "I will be outside tending to the animals if you need anything. Do not try to get up too fast. You lost a fair bit of blood." After he left, Karga lay back and stared at the ceiling beams. The room was small but clean, with whitewashed walls and a window that let in the morning light. She could hear chickens clucking outside and the distant lowing of cattle. It was so peaceful, so different from the harsh camps of her clan where every moment was filled with preparation for the next raid or battle. She touched the bandage on her head, feeling the careful stitching beneath. Barrett had taken time to tend her properly, not just throwing her in a barn or leaving her to heal on her own. He had called her his lady as if she were human nobility rather than an exiled orc with nowhere to go. The tears came suddenly, surprising her. Karga had not cried since she was a child. Orcs did not cry. They fought, they endured, they survived. But lying in this strange human's bed, treated with more kindness than her own mother had shown her, the grief and exhaustion overwhelmed her defenses. She cried quietly, pressing her face into the pillow so Barrett would not hear. She cried for the family that had rejected her, for the loneliness of the past 3 days, for the fear that had gripped her as she collapsed in the mud believing she would die alone. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she slept again. When Karga woke the second time, the sun was high in the sky. She sat up slowly, relieved to find that the dizziness had passed. Her head still ached, but it was manageable. She examined herself and found that someone had cleaned the mud and blood from her skin and dressed her in a clean linen shirt that hung to her knees. Her own clothes, torn and filthy, were nowhere to be seen. The smell of cooking food drew her attention. Her stomach cramped with hunger, reminding her that she had not eaten in days. Karga stood carefully, testing her balance, then made her way to the door. The main room of the farmhouse was simple but well kept. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking pot hanging over low flames. A rough-hewn table stood in the center with 4 mismatched chairs around it. Shelves lined the walls, holding plates, cups, and various household items. Everything was clean and organized in a way that spoke of discipline and care. Barrett stood at the fireplace, stirring the pot. He glanced over his shoulder as she entered and smiled. "There you are, my lady, feeling better." "Yes, thank you." Karga felt awkward standing there in his shirt, aware of how large she must look compared to him. Orcs were naturally bigger and more muscular than humans, and at 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, she filled the borrowed garment considerably. "You did not have to wash me." "Well, I figured you would prefer to wake up clean rather than covered in 3 days' worth of road dust and blood," Barrett said matter-of-factly. "I hope you do not mind. I tried to be respectful about it. Your clothes are hanging outside to dry." "I mended the tears as best I could, but I am no seamstress." The casualness of his tone somehow made the situation less embarrassing. Karga moved closer to the fire, drawn by the warmth and the smell of the food. "What are you making?" "Vegetable stew with some salt pork." "Nothing fancy, but it is hot and filling." He ladled some into a wooden bowl and handed it to her along with a spoon. "Sit down and eat. You need to get your strength back." Karga sat at the table and took a cautious bite. The stew was simple but well seasoned, with chunks of potato, carrots, and onions in a rich broth. She had to restrain herself from devouring it too quickly. Barrett joined her with his own bowl, eating in companionable silence. "How long have you lived here?" Karga asked after she had taken the edge off her hunger. 5 years this spring," Barrett replied. "Bought the land with my pension from the army. It was pretty run down when I got here, but I have fixed it up bit by bit. Got about 50 acres under cultivation now, plus some chickens, a few cows, and 2 horses. It is a good life, quiet." "You not miss the company of other humans," Barrett shrugged. "There is a village about 10 miles west. I go there once a month to trade and pick up supplies." That is enough socializing for me. Most of my unit died in the wars. The ones who survived scattered to the winds afterward. Out here, I do not have to think about all that. Karga understood that. The weight of memories that could not be shaken, the desire to leave behind everything that reminded you of pain. I am sorry, she said, for your losses. And I am sorry for yours, Barrett replied gently. Takes a special kind of strength to walk away from everything you have ever known because you believe it is wrong. I respect that. They finished their meal in silence. Karga helped Barrett clean up despite his protests that she should rest. The domesticity of the act felt strange and comforting at once. She had never done household chores back with her clan. Orcs divided labor strictly by gender, and women were expected to focus on fighting, hunting, and bearing children. Cooking and cleaning were considered beneath them, tasks left to the weak or injured. I should leave soon, Karga said as she dried the last bowl. I have imposed on your hospitality long enough. Barrett turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. Where will you go? Karga hesitated. She had no answer to that question. I will figure something out. You are still weak from your injuries, Barrett said. And even if you were at full strength, you have no supplies, no food, no money. Winter is coming in a few months. Where exactly do you think you will go that will take in an orc with nothing to her name? The words were blunt but not unkind. They were simply the truth, and Karga appreciated that he did not try to soften it with false comfort. I do not expect you to take care of me, she said quietly. You have already done more than anyone could ask. I am not suggesting charity, Barrett said. I am suggesting a fair trade. This farm is more work than one man can handle on his own. I could use help with the harvest coming up, and there is always more work to be done around here. You stay and work, I will provide food and shelter, we will call it even. Karga stared at him. You want me to work for you, with me, Barrett corrected. Not for me. I am not looking for a servant, I am looking for a partner to help run this place. You are clearly strong, and if you have any farming experience, that is a bonus. If you do not, I can teach you. What do you say, my lady? Will you stay? The offer was more than Karga had dared hope for. A place to stay, work to do, and a chance to prove her worth. But there was one question that needed asking. Why are you doing this? She asked. You know what other humans will say if they find out you have an orc living here. Barrett met her eyes steadily. I stopped caring what other people thought about my choices a long time ago. This is my land, my home. I will decide who is welcome here. Besides, he added with a slight smile, most of the villagers think I am a bit mad anyway for living out here alone. This will just confirm their suspicions. Despite everything, Karga felt her lips twitch into an almost smile. You might be a bit mad at that. Probably, Barrett agreed cheerfully. So is that a yes? Karga took a deep breath. She could leave, could try to make it on her own, and likely die before the first snow fell. Or she could accept this unexpected kindness and build something new. The choice was not difficult. Yes, she said, I will stay. Excellent, Barrett said, clapping his hands together. In that case, welcome to the farm, my lady. Let me show you around properly. The farm was larger than Karga had initially realized. Barrett walked her through the fields, pointing out the different crops. Wheat dominated the landscape, golden stalks swaying in the breeze, but there were also fields of oats, barley, and vegetables. A small orchard of apple trees stood on the eastern edge of the property, the fruit just beginning to ripen. The wheat needs harvesting in about 2 weeks, Barrett explained as they walked. That is the big job. After that, we will thresh it and take it to the mill in the village. The money from that sale covers most of my expenses for the year. They visited the barn next, a sturdy structure with a loft for hay storage. 2 horses looked up from their stalls as they entered, and Barrett introduced them as Copper and Steel, both retired cavalry mounts. "Could not bring myself to let them go when I mustered out," he said, stroking Copper's nose. "They have earned a peaceful retirement." The cows, 3 of them, grazed in a nearby pasture. The chickens had a coop near the house, and Barrett collected eggs as they passed, handing Karga a basket to carry them in. "They are good layers," he said. "We usually have more eggs than I can eat, so I trade the extras in the village for things I cannot grow or make myself." By the time they returned to the house, the sun was setting. Karga felt tired but satisfied. The farm was well maintained and clearly the product of hard work and careful planning. She could see herself fitting into the rhythm of this place. "You will need your own space," Barrett said as they entered the house. "The bedroom you were in was mine. There is a smaller room off the main area that I have been using for storage. We can clear it out and make it yours." "I can sleep in the barn," Karga offered. "I do not need much." Barrett shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. You are not livestock, my lady. You will have a proper room with a proper bed. It might take a few days to get it sorted, but we will manage." That night, Barrett insisted Karga keep the bedroom while he made himself a pallet near the fireplace. She tried to argue, but he waved off her protests with the comment that he had slept in far worse conditions during the war. Exhausted from the day's activities, Karga eventually gave in. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the farm at night, Karga felt something she had not experienced in a long time: hope. Tomorrow she would begin working, proving her worth and earning her place here. Tomorrow she would start building a new life. The work began at dawn. Barrett woke her gently, and they shared a breakfast of eggs, bread, and fresh milk from the cows. Then he led her out to the fields and taught her how to test the wheat for readiness, showing her how to rub the kernels between her palms to check if they were hard and dry enough for harvest. "Another week, maybe 10 days, he assessed, "which gives us time to prepare. We need to sharpen the scythes, repair the wagon, and make sure we have enough sacks for the grain." Karga learned quickly that farming was harder than it looked. It required not just strength but also knowledge, timing, and constant attention to detail. Barrett was a patient teacher, explaining each task thoroughly and showing her the right way to do things. He never talked down to her or expressed frustration when she made mistakes, simply correcting her and moving on. They worked side by side throughout the day, pausing only for a simple lunch of bread and cheese. Karga was used to physical labor, but farming used muscles differently than fighting. By evening, she ached in places she had not known could ache. "You did well today, my lady," Barrett said as they washed up for supper. "Better than well, actually. I was not expecting you to keep up with me all day." "Orcs are built for endurance," Karga replied, "and I have never been afraid of hard work. I can see that." Barrett set a pot of potatoes on to boil. "But you still need to pace yourself. The work will still be here tomorrow. No point in wearing yourself to the bone on your first day." Over supper, Barrett told her more about his life. He had joined the army at 18, running away from a father who drank too much and hit too hard. The army had given him structure, purpose, and brothers in arms who became the family he had never really had. The border wars had been brutal, a grinding conflict that lasted nearly 2 decades as human kingdoms expanded into territories claimed by orc clans. "I killed a lot of orcs during those years," Barrett said quietly, his eyes distant. "Did what I was ordered to do. Believed we were protecting innocent people from savages. But the longer the war went on, the more I started to question it. We would burn an orc village, and I would see mothers trying to shield their children. We would interrogate prisoners, and they would talk about defending their ancestral lands. Started to realize that maybe we were not the heroes of this story. What changed? Karga asked. There was this one battle, Barrett said. We had an orc unit pinned down in a canyon. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. We could have just waited them out, let them surrender. But our commander ordered an assault, said we needed to send a message. By the time it was over, we had killed them all. Men, women, even a few kids who were too young to understand what was happening. He was quiet for a moment. That night, I sat in my tent and realized I did not want to be the kind of person who could do that anymore. I put in for retirement the next week. Soon as it was approved, I left and never looked back. Karga felt a deep respect for this man. He had been her enemy once, might have killed members of her own clan, yet he had found the strength to question his own actions and walk away. That took a kind of courage she was only beginning to understand. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Figured you had a right to know who you are living with," Barrett replied. "I am not proud of everything I have done, but I am trying to be better than I was." "So am I," Karga said softly. They cleared up the supper dishes together, and Barrett showed her the small storage room that would become her bedroom. It was cluttered with tools, sacks of seed, and various farm equipment, but it had a window and enough space for a bed. "We will clear this out tomorrow," Barrett said. "I have some extra lumber in the barn. We can build you a bed frame, and I have a spare mattress stored in the loft. It will be cozy." "It will be perfect," Karga said, and she meant it. The days developed a steady rhythm. They woke with the sun, ate a quick breakfast, and then worked until midday. After a simple lunch, they would rest during the hottest part of the afternoon, then work again until sunset. Supper was followed by chores like mending tools, caring for the animals, or working on Karga's room. Within a week, the storage room had been transformed. Barrett had built a sturdy bed frame, and they had found a decent mattress in the barn loft that just needed airing out. Karga's mended clothes hung on pegs on the wall, and there was a small table with a candle for light. It was sparse but comfortable, and most importantly, it was hers. The wheat harvest began on a clear morning when the dew had barely dried from the stalks. Barrett showed Karga how to use a scythe, the long curved blade sweeping through the wheat in steady arcs. It was back-breaking work, bending and swinging hour after hour under the hot sun. "Keep the blade low," Barrett instructed, demonstrating the proper angle. "You want to cut near the base, but not so low you dull the edge on dirt. Nice and steady. Find a rhythm and stick to it." Karga followed his example, and soon they were moving through the field side by side, the swish of the scythes creating a steady cadence. Barrett had not lied about the difficulty. Her back screamed in protest, and her hands developed blisters that broke and bled. But she refused to slow down or complain. This was her contribution, her way of earning her place. Barrett noticed her bleeding hands during their midday break. He disappeared into the house and returned with clean cloth and salve. "Let me see them," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Karga reluctantly held out her hands. The blisters were angry and raw, some still weeping fluid. Barrett cleaned them carefully, applied the salve with gentle touches, and then wrapped them in the cloth. "This will help them heal faster," he said. "And tomorrow we will wrap your hands before you start. Should have thought of that sooner. Your skin is not used to this kind of work yet." "I can handle it," Karga said, perhaps more defensively than she intended. Barrett looked up at her, his hazel eyes serious. "I know you can, my lady. You are one of the toughest people I have ever met. But there is a difference between being tough and being stupid. Taking care of your hands so you can keep working is just good sense, not weakness." The words took the edge off her pride. He was right, of course. Back with her clan, admitting to pain or injury had been seen as weakness. But Barrett was not judging her. He was simply being practical. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You are welcome. Now let us eat something before we get back to it. We have made good progress this morning." They worked for 2 weeks to bring in the entire wheat harvest. Each evening they would bundle the cut wheat into sheaves and stack them in the barn to dry. The work was relentless and exhausting, but there was something deeply satisfying about it. Karga could see the physical results of her labor, could measure their progress across the field. Barrett proved to be good company during the long days. He had a dry sense of humor and a gift for telling stories that made the time pass more quickly. He talked about funny incidents from his army days, about the time Copper had thrown a general into a mud puddle, about the year he had accidentally planted turnips in the wheat field because the seed sacks had gotten mixed up. Karga found herself laughing more than she had in years. She also found herself sharing her own stories, carefully edited versions of life in her clan. She told him about the time she had accidentally released all the hunting hounds during a festival, about her friend, Mara, who could shoot an arrow through a falling leaf, about the elder who told impossible tall tales to the children. "Sounds like you missed some of it," Barrett observed one evening as they stacked the last sheaves. "Some of it," Karga admitted. "I miss the people I cared about, but I do not miss the constant fighting, the raids, the belief that violence was the only way to prove your worth. I was tired of it long before they cast me out." "What made you refuse that last raid?" Karga was quiet for a moment, remembering. "The village they wanted to attack was small, mostly farmers from what the scouts reported. I asked why we needed to raid them at all. We had enough food, enough supplies. My mother said it was about dominance, about reminding the humans that they could not encroach on our territory without consequences. But I had seen that village before on a hunt. There were children playing in the fields, families." She looked at Barrett. "How could I attack people who were just trying to live their lives? People like you." Barrett reached out and squeezed her shoulder briefly. "You made the right choice. Cost you everything, but it was still right. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just kept my mouth shut. Gone on the raid, done what was expected, I would still have a home, a family." "But you would have had to live with yourself afterward," Barrett said. "That is harder than being alone." Karga realized he was speaking from experience. They finished the work in comfortable silence. When the wheat was finally all cut, bundled, and stored, Barrett declared a day of rest. They slept late, ate a leisurely breakfast, and spent the afternoon doing light chores and simply enjoying the peace. Karga found herself watching Barrett as he worked, noting the easy competence of his movements, the care he took with even small tasks. He had become important to her, she realized with some surprise. In the weeks since he had found her in his field, Barrett had shown her more consistent kindness than anyone in her life. He treated her with respect, valued her contributions, and never made her feel like a burden or an outsider. When he called her "my lady," it no longer felt strange. It felt like he saw something in her worth respecting. The thought made her uncomfortable. Karga had spent her entire life being taught that humans were the enemy, that they were weak and treacherous. Yet Barrett defied every stereotype. He was strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical prowess. He had principles he was willing to sacrifice for. And he had opened his home to her without asking for anything in return except honest work. She was also becoming increasingly aware of him in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude or respect. The way his shirt pulled across his shoulders when he lifted something heavy. The sound of his laugh, warm and unguarded. The gentle way he handled the animals, and the way those same hands had tended her wounds and wrapped her blisters. These thoughts troubled her. Humans and orcs did not form attachments like that. It was unnatural, forbidden by both societies. Yet here she was, finding herself drawn to this human farmer in ways she did not fully understand. The trip to the village came sooner than Karga would have liked. They loaded the wagon with sacks of wheat and prepared for the 10-mile journey. Barrett seemed to sense her nervousness. "You do not have to come if you do not want to," he said. "I can make the trip alone." "No," Karga said, straightening her shoulders. "If I am going to live here, I need to face the villagers eventually. Might as well get it over with." Barrett nodded approvingly. "We will be fine. Just stick close to me and try not to let anyone provoke you. Some folks might say ignorant things. Best to just ignore them." The village was called Milford, a cluster of about 30 buildings centered around a crossroads. The mill itself sat beside a river, its great wheel turning steadily in the current. People stopped what they were doing to stare as Barrett drove the wagon down the main street with Karga sitting beside him. The whispers started immediately. Karga kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral, but she could feel the hostility and fear radiating from the humans they passed. Children were pulled inside houses. Men reached for weapons they were not quite willing to draw. Women clutched each other and murmured prayers. "Easy," Barrett said quietly. "Let them look. They will settle down." They pulled up to the mill where a portly man with flour dusting his apron stood in the doorway. His eyes widened when he saw Karga, and his hand dropped to the club hanging from his belt. "Barrett Gentry," the miller said slowly. "What in all the hells are you doing bringing an orc into my village?" "Hello, Thomas," Barrett replied calmly, climbing down from the wagon. "I am here to sell my wheat, same as always. Karga here is working my farm with me. She is not a threat to anyone." "Not a threat," Thomas sputtered. "She is an orc. They killed my cousin in the border wars. They burn villages and slaughter innocents." "So did we," Barrett said quietly. "On both sides of the war, Thomas. You know that as well as I do. This war is over. Time to let the hate go." Other villagers had gathered around, forming a loose circle around the wagon. Karga remained seated, forcing herself to appear relaxed even as her muscles tensed for potential violence. She would not start a fight, but she would defend herself if necessary. An older woman pushed through the crowd, leaning heavily on a cane. She had iron gray hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Barrett Gentry," she said in a voice that carried authority. "What is this about?" "Mrs. Everly," Barrett said respectfully. "This is Karga. She is helping with my farm. We came to sell the wheat harvest and resupply." Mrs. Everly studied Karga for a long moment. "Orc, are you a threat to this village?" "No, madam," Karga replied, making her voice as steady and unthreatening as possible. "I only want to live in peace." "Why should we believe that?" someone shouted from the crowd. "Orcs cannot be trusted." "I have given up everything to avoid violence," Karga said, raising her voice to be heard. "My clan cast me out because I refused to raid a human village. I have no interest in fighting or killing. I only want to work and earn an honest living." "She is telling the truth," Barrett added. "I found her half dead in my field. She has been helping with the harvest for weeks now. She has never given me any reason to doubt her word." Mrs. Everly tapped her cane against the ground thoughtfully. "Thomas, weigh the man's wheat. Barrett has been trading here for 5 years and has never caused trouble. If he vouches for this orc, that is good enough for me." She fixed the crowd with a stern look. "Anyone who wants to start something will answer to me. Is that clear?" The crowd grumbled but dispersed slowly. Thomas looked like he wanted to argue but apparently decided that defying Mrs. Everly was more than he wanted to deal with. "Fine. Bring the sacks inside." Barrett and Karga unloaded the wheat while Thomas weighed and inspected it. The miller worked in sullen silence, clearly unhappy with the situation but unwilling to turn away good grain. He paid Barrett in silver coins and gave him a receipt that could be redeemed for flour later. "Thank you, Thomas," Barrett said pleasantly, as if nothing awkward had happened. "We will be back next month with the oat harvest." They visited the general store next, where a nervous young clerk filled their order for supplies: flour, salt, sugar, lamp oil, and various other necessities. The clerk kept glancing at Karga as if expecting her to suddenly attack, but he completed the transaction without incident. Mrs. Everleigh found them as they were loading the supplies into the wagon. "Barrett, a word." They stepped aside while Karga finished securing the load. "What you are doing is dangerous," Mrs. Everleigh said bluntly. "People have long memories. The border wars ended, but the pain did not. There are men in this village who lost sons and brothers to orc raids. You cannot expect them to welcome one into their midst." "I am not asking them to welcome her," Barrett replied. "I am asking them to leave her alone. She has done nothing to any of them." "She exists," Mrs. Everleigh said. "For some people that is enough. Watch yourself, Barrett, and watch her. If there is any trouble, any at all, the whole village will turn on both of you." "I understand. Thank you for your support today." Mrs. Everleigh smiled slightly. "You are a good man, Barrett. A bit too idealistic for your own good, but a good man nonetheless. Just be careful." The trip home was quiet. Barrett seemed lost in thought, and Karga was processing the experience of being surrounded by hostile humans. It had been frightening, but also oddly empowering. She had faced their hatred and survived it. She had not backed down or apologized for existing. "You handled that well," Barrett said as they approached the farm. "I know it could not have been easy." "Your Mrs. Everleigh is formidable," Karga observed. Barrett laughed. "That she is. She more or less runs the village council. Her husband was the mayor before he died, and she has been the real power ever since. If she is on our side, we will be all right." That night, as Karga lay in her small room, she thought about Mrs. Everleigh's warning. The trip to the village had made real something she had been avoiding thinking about. She and Barrett were building something that the world outside this farm would never accept. Their partnership, their growing friendship, was a transgression against the unspoken rules of both their societies. But Karga found that she did not care. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The autumn deepened, and the work continued. They harvested the oats and barley, tended the vegetable garden, and gathered apples from the orchard. Barrett taught Karga how to preserve food for winter, and they spent long evenings cutting vegetables for pickling, making apple cider and smoking meat. The nights grew colder, and Barrett began preparing the house for winter. He repaired chinks in the walls, checked the chimney, and made sure they had enough firewood stacked. Karga helped with all of it, learning skills she had never needed before. They also began spending more time together in the evenings. After supper and chores were done, they would sit by the fire and talk. Barrett taught her to play cards, and she taught him some orc gambling games that involved stones and dice. They talked about philosophy, about the nature of courage, about what made a life worth living. One evening, as the first frost silvered the fields outside, Barrett asked her a question that had clearly been on his mind for a while. "Do you ever regret it, leaving your clan?" Karga considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the people, but I do not regret the choice. I am happier here than I ever was there. Even though you are living among humans, even though the village treats you like a threat, even so." Karga met his eyes. "Here I can be myself. I do not have to pretend to be someone I am not. I do not have to act like violence is the answer to everything, and I have a friend who treats me like I matter." Barrett smiled, that warm expression that transformed his weathered face. "You do matter, my lady, more than you know." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Karga felt her heart beat faster, felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "You matter to me too," she said quietly. The moment stretched, fragile and perfect. Then Barrett cleared his throat and began shuffling the cards for another game. One more hand before bed, one more, Karga agreed. But something had shifted between them. They both felt it, even if neither was ready to name it. The first snow came in late November, a light dusting that turned the farm into a winter wonderland. Barrett surveyed it with satisfaction. "We are well prepared," he said. "Plenty of food stored, animals have shelter, firewood stacked to the rafters. We can sit out the winter in comfort." Comfort turned out to be relative. The farmhouse was sturdy but not well insulated, and the cold seeped in through every crack. They took to spending most of their time in the main room where the fireplace kept things warm. Karga's small room was too cold to sleep in once the deep winter set in, so Barrett rigged a curtain to divide the main room in half. He took one side, she took the other, and they maintained their privacy while sharing the warmth. The close quarters brought a new intimacy to their relationship. They could not help but be aware of each other constantly, separated only by a curtain. Karga became familiar with the sounds of Barrett's nightly routine, the way he banked the fire before bed, the soft prayers he murmured when he thought she was asleep. She found herself lying awake at night, listening to him breathe, acutely aware that only a few feet of space separated them. It was torture and comfort in equal measure. The winter days developed their own rhythm. Morning chores involved breaking ice on the water troughs, feeding the animals, and collecting eggs from very disgruntled chickens. Then they would return to the house for breakfast and spend the day on indoor tasks, mending clothes and tools, planning for spring planting, or simply reading from Barrett's small collection of books. Barrett had taught Karga to read the previous month, and she had taken to it with enthusiasm. He owned a dozen books, most of them practical manuals about farming and animal husbandry, but there were also a few novels and a volume of poetry. Karga devoured them all, hungry for knowledge and stories. "You are a natural scholar," Barrett observed one afternoon as she sat absorbed in a novel. "You could have been a teacher or a scribe if you had been born in different circumstances." "Orcs do not have much use for reading," Karga said. "Our history is kept in oral tradition, passed down through stories. I never knew what I was missing." "One of the few good things about human society," Barrett said. "We write everything down. Means you can learn from people who lived centuries ago." On the coldest days, when the wind howled around the house and snow piled against the walls, they stayed inside entirely. Those were Karga's favorite days, if she was honest with herself. There was something cozy about being trapped inside with Barrett, safe and warm while the world froze outside. They would cook elaborate meals just for something to do, play endless games of cards, and talk about everything and nothing. It was during one of these snow-bound days that Karga finally acknowledged what she had been trying to ignore for weeks. She was falling in love with Barrett Gentry. The realization came as she watched him prepare supper, his movements efficient and sure as he chopped vegetables and seasoned the stew. He was humming tunelessly to himself, completely unself-conscious. The firelight played across his features, softening the harsh lines that war and hard work had carved into his face. He looked up and caught her staring. "Something wrong, my lady?" "No," Karga said quickly. "Nothing wrong, just thinking." "Dangerous pastime," Barrett said with a smile, but his eyes were curious. Karga could not tell him, of course. The gulf between them was too wide. He was human, she was orc. He had shown her kindness and friendship, had given her a home when she had nowhere else to go. To burden him with romantic feelings he could never return would be selfish and cruel. It would ruin everything they had built together. So she kept her feelings locked away and tried to content herself with what she had. A home, meaningful work, and the closest friend she had ever known. It should have been enough. But as winter deepened and they spent long evenings by the fire, sitting close for warmth, Karga found it increasingly difficult to ignore the way her heart raced when Barrett smiled at her, the way her skin tingled when their hands accidentally brushed, the way she had started thinking of this farm as home and Barrett as hers, in a way that went far beyond their working arrangement. She was in love, and it was hopeless, and there was nothing she could do but endure it. If Barrett noticed her growing distraction, he was kind enough not to mention it. The winter continued its slow march toward spring. In January, a harsh storm struck that lasted 3 days. The snow piled so high they could barely open the door. The wind was so fierce it found every tiny gap in the walls, and even with the fire roaring, the house remained bitterly cold. On the second night of the storm, Karga woke to the sound of Barrett coughing. She lay still, listening as the coughs grew harsher and more frequent. Finally, she got up and peered around the curtain. Barrett was sitting up in his makeshift bed, wrapped in blankets, his shoulders shaking with the force of his coughs. Even in the dim firelight, she could see the flush of fever on his cheeks. "Barrett," she moved closer. "Are you all right?" "Fine," he managed between coughs. "Just a cold, nothing to worry about." Karga pressed her hand to his forehead and felt the heat radiating from his skin. "You are burning up. This is more than a cold." "I will be fine in the morning," Barrett insisted, but his voice was weak and his eyes too bright. "Lie down," Karga ordered. She built up the fire and fetched water, forcing him to drink. Then she found the medicine supplies and mixed a tea from dried herbs, the way she had seen the healers in her clan do it. Barrett drank it obediently, too sick to argue. Over the next 2 days, Karga nursed him through the fever. She kept the fire going, made sure he drank plenty of fluids, and cooled his forehead with damp cloths when the fever spiked. She barely slept, afraid to leave him alone for long. The animals would have to fend for themselves until Barrett recovered. On the 3rd night, the fever finally broke. Barrett woke lucid for the first time in days, his eyes clear though exhausted. "Karga, I am here." She was sitting beside his bed, where she had spent most of the past 3 days. "You have been taking care of me," he said, his voice hoarse. "Of course I have." "Did you think I would just let you burn up with fever?" "I thought you might have better sense than to risk catching whatever I have," Barrett said, but he smiled weakly. "Orcs have strong constitutions. I do not get sick easily." Karga checked his forehead again and was relieved to find it cooler. "How do you feel?" "Like I was trampled by a horse, but better than I did." He reached up and caught her hand. "Thank you, my lady, you saved my life." "You saved mine first," Karga pointed out. "We are even." Barrett's thumb stroked across her knuckles, a small gesture that sent electricity through her entire body. "I do not think we will ever be even. I think I will always owe you more than I can repay." "You gave me a home," Karga said softly. "You gave me a reason to keep living when I had none." "I could never repay that." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the firelight dancing across the walls. Then Barrett squeezed her hand gently and released it. "I should sleep. Real sleep this time, not fever dreams. I will be right here if you need anything." "I know." Barrett settled back into his blankets, and within minutes, his breathing had evened out into sleep. Karga sat watching him for a while longer, her hand still tingling where he had touched her. The storm outside had finally blown itself out, and in the morning they would need to dig out and check on the animals. But for now, in this quiet moment, Karga allowed herself to simply feel the depth of her love for this man. It was still hopeless. It was still impossible. But it was real, and it was hers, and no one could take it from her. Barrett recovered slowly over the next week. Karga took over most of the heavy work, insisting he rest and regain his strength. He grumbled about being useless, but he was still too weak to do much more than help with cooking and light chores. "You are worse than any army medic I ever met," he complained good-naturedly, as Karga refused to let him go out to the barn in the freezing cold. "Army medics kept you alive to fight another day," Karga retorted. "I am keeping you alive to be a farmer, different priorities." "Is that so, my lady?" "That is so." Barrett laughed, then winced as the laughter turned into a cough. "All right, you win. I will stay inside and be useless for another day." By the time Barrett was back to full strength, they had slipped into a new dynamic. The barriers between them had lowered somehow during those days of Karga caring for him. They touched more casually now, a hand on a shoulder, a brush of fingers as they passed objects back and forth. They sat closer together in the evenings, drawn by something more than just the need for warmth. Neither of them spoke about it. It was as if they both understood that acknowledging what was happening between them would force them to confront questions they were not ready to answer. The late winter brought a thaw, turning the farm into a muddy mess. But it also brought the first hints of spring, buds on the apple trees, the return of migrating birds, longer days and shorter nights. "We need to start planning the spring planting," Barrett said one evening over supper. "I was thinking we could expand the wheat field by a few acres, maybe plant some flax this year. We could use the money from the extra crops." "What about the south field?" Karga asked. "The soil seems good there, and it is not too far from the stream for irrigation." "Good thinking." Barrett pulled out a rough map of the farm, and they spent the evening discussing options, debating the merits of different crops and planning their work schedule. It was prosaic and domestic and perfect. They were planning a future together, even if neither of them dared to define what that future might look like beyond the practical details of crop rotation and harvest schedules. In March, Barrett made another trip to the village for supplies. This time Karga stayed at the farm, both of them understanding without discussion that it was better not to provoke unnecessary confrontation. Barrett returned with the supplies and an unexpected guest. Mrs. Everly climbed down from the wagon with Barrett's assistance, leaning heavily on her cane. "Good afternoon, dear," she said to Karga. "I hope you do not mind me dropping by unannounced." "Of course not, madam," Karga said, surprised but pleased. "Welcome to our home." Mrs. Everly's eyes sharpened at the word "our," but she did not comment. Barrett helped her inside and settled her in the best chair near the fire. Karga made tea while Barrett tended to the horses. "I will be direct," Mrs. Everly said once they were all seated with cups of tea. "There has been talk in the village." "There is always talk," Barrett said mildly. "This is different. Some of the younger men, hotheads mostly, have been drinking at the tavern and working each other up. They are saying you have betrayed humanity by harboring an orc, saying you have probably gone native, that you might even be working with orc raiders." Karga felt ice form in her stomach. "That is ridiculous. I have not had contact with any orc since I was exiled. I know that, and so do the sensible people in the village, but sense is not always the strongest voice." Mrs. Everly sipped her tea. "I came to warn you. Keep your heads down, avoid the village for a while. This will probably blow over once they find something else to get excited about, but until then, be careful." "Thank you for the warning," Barrett said quietly after Mrs. Everly left, carried back to the village in Barrett's wagon. Karga and Barrett sat in troubled silence. "Maybe I should leave," Karga finally said. "I am putting you in danger just by being here." "No," Barrett's voice was firm. "This is your home. You are not leaving because some drunk fools cannot see past their own prejudice. But if they come here, if they try to hurt you because of me, then they will regret it." Barrett's expression was hard now, showing glimpses of the soldier he had once been. I did not survive 20 years of war to be bullied by ignorant villagers. You are staying, and we will face whatever comes together." Karga wanted to argue, wanted to insist that his safety was more important than her presence, but the determination in his eyes stopped her. He had made his choice and he would not be moved. "Together, then," she said softly. Barrett's expression softened. He reached across the table and took her hand. "Together." The moment seemed to expand, filled with everything they had been avoiding saying. Barrett looked down at their joined hands, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Karga," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What is it?" "These past months, living here with you, working beside you, I have," he paused, seeming to struggle for words. "You have become the most important person in my life. I look forward to seeing you every morning. I miss you when you are not around. You make me laugh, you challenge me to be better, and you have shown me what true courage looks like." He finally met her eyes. "I am in love with you, my lady. I know it is impossible. I know the world will never accept it, but I cannot lie to myself anymore. I love you." Karga felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have for months now. I thought I was alone in feeling this way." "Never alone," Barrett said. He stood and moved around the table, pulling her to her feet. "I do not know what we are going to do about this. I do not have any answers, but I needed you to know. I am glad you told me." Karga looked up at him, this human man who had given her everything. "What do we do now?" "I suppose we keep living our lives," Barrett said. "Keep working the farm, keep being together, and maybe eventually the world will catch up to how we feel. And if it does not, then to hell with the world." Barrett cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Karga breathed. The kiss was soft and sweet and perfect. Barrett's lips moved against hers with tender reverence, as if she were something precious and fragile. Karga wrapped her arms around him, pulling him closer, marveling at how perfectly they fit together despite all their differences. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Barrett rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for so long. So have I." They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, and Karga felt something settle into place in her soul. This was right. Whatever the world said, whatever obstacles they would face, this was right. The spring planting kept them busy over the following weeks. They worked side by side in the fields, turning the soil and planting seed. Their new understanding added a dimension to their partnership. They would steal kisses when the work allowed, hold hands as they walked back to the house in the evenings, and fall asleep wrapped in each other's arms now that there was no longer a curtain dividing the room. It was blissful and terrifying in equal measure. Karga knew they were living on borrowed time. The hostility from the village had not disappeared, and eventually something would force a confrontation. But for now, she chose to savor every moment of happiness. In late April, the confrontation came. Karga was working in the vegetable garden when she heard horses approaching. She looked up to see 5 men riding toward the farm, and her heart sank. She recognized a few of them from the village, young men with hard eyes and weapons on their belts. Barrett emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. His expression was calm but wary. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The leader, a stocky man with a reddish beard, spat on the ground. "We are here about the orc." "Karga is none of your concern," Barrett said evenly. "She works this farm with me and has done nothing to harm anyone." "She exists," another man snarled. "That is harm enough. Orcs killed my brother. I will not have one living free while good humans lie dead." "The war is over," Barrett said. "Carrying on the hatred serves no purpose." "The war is not over until every orc is dead or driven out," the leader said. He fixed his gaze on Karga. "You have 2 choices, orc. Leave now or we will make you leave." Karga stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands. She had known this moment would come eventually. "I will not leave my home because you tell me to." "Your home?" The leader laughed harshly. "You do not have a home here, beast. This is human land." "She has as much right to be here as you do," Barrett said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "More, actually, since you are trespassing on my property. I am going to ask you once to leave peacefully." "Or what?" The leader's hand dropped to his sword. "You going to fight all 5 of us, old man, if I have to?" The men dismounted, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Karga moved to stand beside Barrett, and he glanced at her with concern. "Stay behind me." "No," Karga said quietly. "We do this together, remember?" The leader drew his sword. "Last chance, orc, walk away now." "No." Everything happened very fast after that. The leader lunged forward, sword raised. Barrett moved with the speed and precision of his military training, sidestepping the attack and delivering a punishing blow to the man's solar plexus. The leader went down gasping. 2 more men attacked from the sides. Karga met one of them, ducking under his wild swing and landing a solid punch to his jaw. He staggered back, and she followed up with a kick that sent him sprawling. Her orc strength and fighting training made short work of the unprepared villager. Barrett was engaged with 2 opponents, his movements economical and efficient. Despite being outnumbered, his experience gave him a significant advantage. Within minutes, 3 of the 5 attackers were down, groaning in pain or unconscious. The remaining 2 exchanged glances and clearly decided discretion was the better part of valor. They grabbed their injured companions and retreated to their horses, dragging the still gasping leader with them. "This is not over," the leader shouted as they rode away. "You will regret protecting that beast." Karga and Barrett stood watching them disappear down the road. When they were finally out of sight, Barrett let out a long breath. "Well, that could have gone worse." "Are you hurt?" Karga asked, looking him over anxiously. "A few bruises, nothing serious." "I am fine." Karga flexed her knuckles, "but they will be back, with more men next time." Barrett was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight. "Then we will face them again." "Barrett, this is not sustainable." "Eventually they will bring enough men to overwhelm us, or they will burn down the farm while we sleep. You cannot protect me forever." "Watch me," Barrett said stubbornly. "I am not worth dying for." "Yes, you are." Barrett grabbed her shoulders, his eyes blazing. "You are worth everything to me. Do you understand that? I would rather die defending you than live without you." Karga felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I feel the same way. That is why I cannot let you throw your life away for me." Barrett pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Then we find another solution. We do not give up." They stood like that for a long time, drawing comfort from each other. Eventually, they went inside and tended to their minor injuries. Barrett's knuckles were split and bleeding, and Karga had a bruise forming on her ribs. They patched each other up in silence, both lost in thought. That night they lay in bed holding each other, and Karga made a decision. She loved Barrett too much to let him suffer for her sake. If the village would not accept her presence, then she would have to leave. Not forever, perhaps, but long enough for the situation to cool down. She waited until Barrett was deeply asleep, then carefully extracted herself from his arms. She packed a small bag with supplies, moving as quietly as possible. She left a note on the table, explaining her reasoning and promising to return when it was safe. Then she slipped out into the night, her heart breaking with every step that took her away from the home she had found and the man she loved. Karga made it about 3 miles before she heard hoof beats behind her. She turned to see Barrett riding hard on Copper, his face set in determined lines. He pulled up beside her and dismounted in one fluid motion. "Where do you think you are going?" he demanded. "Away. To protect you." "By breaking my heart and leaving me alone." Barrett shook his head. That is not protection, Karga, that is giving up. They will kill you because of me. They might, Barrett agreed. Or they might not. But either way, I would rather face it with you than survive without you. Did you really think I would just let you walk away? I thought it was for the best. The best for who? Barrett stepped closer, his expression softening. Karga, listen to me. I have been alone most of my life. I have lost everyone I ever cared about to war, violence, and hate. When I found you, when I got to know you, I realized I had been given a second chance at happiness. I am not throwing that away because some ignorant villagers cannot see what I see. What do you see? Karga whispered. I see a woman of incredible courage and strength. I see someone who chose principle over comfort, who works harder than anyone I have ever met, and who makes me want to be a better man. I see the person I want to spend the rest of my life with. He took her hands. Marry me, Karga. Let us make this official. Let me stand before the world and declare that you are mine and I am yours. Karga stared at him in shock. Marry you? Barrett, no one will recognize such a marriage. It would make you an outcast too. I do not care. Mrs. Everlie is a retired priestess. She can perform the ceremony. It might not be recognized by the law, but it will be real to us. That is all that matters. You would do that, give up everything for me. I would do anything for you, Barrett said simply. So what do you say, my lady? Will you marry me? Karga felt joy and terror and love all warring in her chest. This was insane. It was impossible. It went against every rule of both their societies, and it was exactly what she wanted more than anything in the world. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. Barrett let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak. We ride to Mrs. Everlie's house right now. Tonight, before you can change your mind or decide to run away again. I will not run, Karga promised. They rode double on copper through the dark, arriving at Mrs. Everlie's cottage just before dawn. The old woman opened her door in her nightgown, took one look at their faces, and smiled knowingly. Let me get dressed, she said. This cannot wait until a decent hour, I suppose. No, madam, Barrett said. It cannot. Mrs. Everlie performed the ceremony in her small parlor as the sun rose. There were no other witnesses, no flowers or fancy clothes, but it was perfect. Barrett held Karga's hands and spoke his vows with a steady voice, promising to love and honor her for all his days. Karga spoke her own vows with tears streaming down her face, pledging herself to him completely. When Mrs. Everlie pronounced them husband and wife, Barrett kissed his bride with a tenderness that made even the old priestess dab at her eyes. You two are either the bravest people I have ever met or the most foolish, Mrs. Everlie said. Possibly both, but I wish you all the happiness in the world. You will need it. Thank you, Karga said, embracing the old woman impulsively. Thank you for believing in us. Someone has to, Mrs. Everlie said dryly. Now go home before the village wakes up and sees you here. I will spread the word as diplomatically as possible, but you should expect trouble. They rode back to the farm as husband and wife, and despite the uncertain future ahead, Karga felt happier than she had ever been. She had found her home, her purpose, and her love. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The news of their marriage spread through the village like wildfire. The reaction was predictably mixed. Some people were outraged, calling Barrett a traitor and demanding action. Others were simply bewildered, unable to comprehend why a human would marry an orc. A few, led by Mrs. Everlie, argued that it was Barrett's business and no one else's. The village council called a meeting to discuss the situation. Barrett attended, despite Karga's protests that it was too dangerous. He returned hours later looking tired but resolute. What did they say? Karga asked anxiously. They cannot legally do anything, Barrett reported. The farm is my property and I have not broken any laws, but they made it clear that I am not welcome in the village anymore. I am to send word if I need supplies and someone will bring them to the edge of my property. I am not to come to Milford again. So we are outcasts. We are, Barrett agreed, but we are outcasts together, and honestly, I prefer our company to theirs anyway. Life on the farm settled into a new normal. They were isolated now, cut off from the village and human society, but they had each other and that made everything bearable. They worked the farm together, planning for a future they would build with their own hands. The isolation was not total. Mrs. Everly visited occasionally, bringing news from the village and supplies that would have been difficult to obtain otherwise. She became a sort of liaison between the farm and the outside world, though even her influence could only do so much. In June, something unexpected happened. Karga woke one morning to the sound of voices outside. She looked out the window to see a small group of figures approaching the farm. Her heart leaped into her throat when she realized they were orcs. She rushed outside, Barrett right behind her. The group consisted of 3 orcs, 2 women and a man, all looking tired and wary. One of the women stepped forward and Karga recognized her with a shock. Mara, her old friend, smiled tentatively. "Hello, Karga. It has been a long time." Karga felt emotion overwhelm her. Mara had been her closest friend in the clan, the one person who had always understood her. "What are you doing here? We heard about what you did," Mara said. "About you refusing the raid, being exiled, and then marrying a human. The story has spread among the clans. Some think you are crazy. But some of us," she gestured to her companions, "some of us were inspired. If you could find a different way to live, maybe we could too." "You were exiled too, we left," the male orc said. "Walked away from the endless fighting. We have been searching for you for weeks. Thought maybe you could teach us how to survive out here." Barrett stepped forward, extending his hand. "Barrett Gentry, any friends of Karga's are welcome here." The orc stared at his offered hand in surprise, then Mara cautiously shook it. "We do not want to impose. We just need advice, maybe some help getting started." "Stay for a few days," Karga said impulsively. "We can teach you the basics of farming, help you figure out where to go next." Over the next week, Karga and Barrett taught the 3 exiled orcs everything they knew about farming and surviving in human territory. Mara and her companions proved to be quick learners, eager to start new lives away from the violence of their clans. On their last night at the farm, they sat around a fire sharing stories and laughter. Karga felt a sense of profound rightness. She and Barrett had not just built a life for themselves. They had created a model that others could follow, proof that humans and orcs could coexist peacefully. "There is unclaimed land about 30 miles north of here," Barrett told them. "Far enough from any settlements that you should not have trouble with humans, but close enough that you could trade if you needed to. You could homestead there." "We will try," Mara said. "If we succeed, maybe more will follow. Maybe we can build a whole community of orcs who choose peace." After they left, Karga and Barrett stood watching the horizon. "Do you realize what we have started?" Karga asked. "A revolution," Barrett said with a smile. "One farm at a time." The summer passed in hard work and quiet contentment. The crops grew tall and healthy. The animals thrived. And Karga and Barrett grew ever closer, their bond deepening with each passing day. In August, on a warm evening with fireflies dancing in the fields, Barrett gave Karga a gift. It was a small wooden box, beautifully carved with intricate patterns. "I made this for you," he said, "to keep your treasures in when you acquire some." Karga opened it carefully and found a folded piece of paper inside. She unfolded it to find a document, officially drawn up and witnessed by Mrs. Everly. It was a deed, granting her co-ownership of the farm. "The farm is half yours now," Barrett said. "Legally and officially. This is your home, Karga, not just because I say so, but because you own it. No one can ever take that away from you." Karga felt tears streaming down her face. "Barrett, I do not know what to say. Say you are happy. Say you will spend the rest of your life with me on this farm, building something beautiful." "I am happy," Karga whispered. "And I will spend every day of my life loving you." They stood together in the twilight, watching the fireflies and dreaming of the future. There would be more challenges ahead. The world had not suddenly become accepting of their union. But they had proven that love could bridge any divide, that courage could overcome any obstacle. Karga thought back to that stormy night when she had collapsed in Barrett's field, certain she was going to die alone and unmourned. She had lost everything that night, her family, her clan, her entire way of life. But she had gained something infinitely more valuable. She had found home, not in a place but in a person. In the weathered hands that held hers, in the kind eyes that saw her true worth, in the steady heart that beat in rhythm with her own. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what, my lady? For calling me that. For treating me like I mattered. For loving me when no one else would." Barrett pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for giving me a reason to believe in hope again. For showing me that the best parts of my life were still ahead of me. For being exactly who you are." As autumn approached and the fields turned gold again, Karga and Barrett prepared for another harvest. This time they were not alone. Mara and her companions visited to help, and Mrs. Everly even sent a few sympathetic villagers who were willing to work for fair pay, regardless of the farmer's choice in spouse. The harvest was abundant, more than enough to see them through the winter and trade for supplies. As they loaded the grain, Karga realized with quiet joy that they had succeeded. They had built a life together against all odds. They had created something worth fighting for. That night, lying in bed with Barrett's arms around her, Karga thought about the long journey that had brought her here. The exile, the collapse in the mud, the moment Barrett had called her my lady for the first time. Every hardship, every moment of fear and doubt had led to this perfect peace. "I love you," she murmured. "I love you too," Barrett replied, his voice drowsy. "Always, my lady, always." Karga closed her eyes and let herself drift into sleep, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The world outside might never fully accept them, but here on this farm, they had created their own world. A world built on love, respect, and the revolutionary belief that peace was always possible for those brave enough to choose it. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility and promise. There would be hard times ahead, certainly. More winters to survive, more prejudice to overcome, more battles to fight. But they would face it all together, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Karga smiled. She had been expelled from her home, cast out into the wilderness to die. Instead, she had been rescued by a veteran farmer who had seen her not as a monster or an enemy, but as a person worthy of dignity and respect. He had called her my lady, and in doing so, had given her back her humanity. Or perhaps he had simply seen what had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. Either way, she was home now. Truly, finally home, and that was the greatest gift anyone had ever given her.